Content warning, Last of Us gets kind of dark at times, I talk about it getting kind of dark at times, and there's some fairly visceral descriptions of gore and violence and things, so if that's not your deal, time to bounce. I have to sync by clicking because I'm an idiot and I forgot to bring a mic stand. I'm a good boy that definitely eats breakfast every day. Adaption or adaptation? I see a lot of people use the word adaption incorrectly online, and it offends me because I'm a vexatiously privileged straight white man and have a constant need to feel I'm better than others in ways that couldn't matter less even if God didn't make each and every one of us so special. Except you, Kevin. Jesus doesn't love you. Adaptation is when an environment has an effect that changes the object in question, while adaptation is the changing of an object to better suit a new environment. When art in one medium is made in another, the artist makes changes to better suit the new medium. Adaptation! I hope this was insufferable enough. Oh, I need a burp. Oh, that stank. I hope this was insufferable enough to make all you stinky, poopy Last of Us fans leave, because I think some of the things I'm going to say in this video is considered blasphemy to you cultists. Cultists you are, you're seraphim. I kid you, Last of Us fans. You're allowed to like things and be passionate about liking them. I'm sorry for insulting you for a cheap joke, especially considering I invited you into my house, though I did say mayhaps. Hell, the timecode should make my hypocrisy very apparent. What's the worst creative idea you've ever had but you thought was genius at the time? The ideas that keep you awake at night with agonizing cringe while you think, Jesus, son of Mary, you never published it anywhere. Unless you did. You didn't post cringe on main, did you? Did you? If you did, you have to share the link in the comments. What? You don't want to? You signed a contract! I have it right here! I should just Foley in a more aggressive paper noise. If you don't post that link, I own your soul. See? You see? It says it right there. It says, I own your soul. It's in Japanese. This isn't actually a contract, this is an instruction manual for a Kirby automaton. One of the worst creative ideas I've ever had is when I was 15 and I thought it'd be really cool if I made an instrumental progressive metal interpretation of the story of Attack on Titan. I wish I was joking. No, it was never made, let alone shared anywhere. Nice try. Oh, I got another burp. That one was less. Oh, that one stank just as much. Also, lay off. I was 15 and still thought jokes about playing Stairway to Heaven in guitar stores and spelling words with music chords was the peak of comedy. There's been quite a bit of character development since then. From one trash can to a slightly larger trash can who's a little bit more self-aware this time. Now, out of all the comments that you definitely left, and as such didn't break your contract giving me access to your eternal soul as my own personal chew toy, how many of them were weird novelty adaptations of pre-existing works, like my aforementioned Dream Theater Goes Weeaboo? Probably not that many, but I'm sure there's at least one. I find it interesting that people seem to have this knee-jerk negative reaction to any adaptation of a piece of art that they love. I remember seeing that Netflix live-action Cowboy Bebop trailer, the one with all the really cool editing with the characters essentially using the fourth wall as a weapon, and my logical brain could go, oh yes, very nice editing and fight choreography, very unique and creative, quality work. But my emotional brain was going, no, God, please, no! Now, I never got the chance to watch any of it myself, but why did I make such a cookie-cutter value judgment before actually seeing any of it? Why do we assume all adaptations of our favorite works are going to suck? Is it because evil capitalists call all the shots and end up making really bland art with little resemblance to the original, lacking the unique and risky ideas that made the original a part of our cultural identity? Well, yes, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. Capitalism is a topic for people with interesting things to say, and I'm here to bore you to tears for the next hour. People have talked bad adaptations to death on this website. I want to talk about good ones. I guess this is a good place for establishing a part title, right? Like that's how these things are structured? Part title, part one. Video game movies don't exclusively suck anymore, I guess. That's not to say they're entirely good. In fact, it's very hit and miss, but 10 years ago it was exclusively misses, so clearly something has changed. A few recent adaptations are actually quite good. Sonic, Mario, Arcane, Cyberpunk, loads of recent adaptations have garnered widespread critical acclaim in comparison to some others which have been polarizing.
What if you miss?
I won't.
I would be far from the first person to point out that a lot of these adaptations, regardless of quality, have almost nothing to do with the source material. Take the Sonic movie. Literally, the entire film is just made up and could have been isolated from its intellectual property and still function largely the same. The only thing it really uses from the games are the character designs and those characters' powers. The quality of an adaptation has nothing to do with any merit to the source material, but the adapter's ability to just make a thing in the new medium that is in equal quality to the original.
Like, the original Assassin's Creed film wasn't bad because it was based on a game, it was bad because the people who made it made a boring movie. And when 2033's Bubsy movie makes clean sweeps at the Oscars, it's gonna be because it was spearheaded by creative genius Zendaya, who beautifully captured the spiritual experience of the original in the scene where Bubsy ODs on heroin! Okay, that's all well and good, but saying adaptations are often bad because skill issue and moving on isn't good enough. What unique aspects of adaptations should be focused on to ensure quality similar to the original? I'm again not the first to say it's about understanding the heart and soul of the source material. It's about using the new medium to represent its feel. The Hobbit trilogy didn't have enough slow bends. Sonic is a fun game for kids about going really, really quick if you ignore a vast majority of the titles since the 2000s about going at middling speeds and ruining future political marriages. The filmmakers understood what Sonic was originally supposed to be, so they made a fun kids movie about a dude that can go really, really quick. The important part wasn't just the hedgehog going quick, but they also had to make an entire whole good kids movie. Or take Monster Hunter. The games are extremely light-hearted romps about slaughtering entire ecosystems with your friends and changing your character's text responses to certain actions to be as rude as possible. Team America World Police Isekai, whilst hilarious on paper, doesn't exactly capture the charm of scoffing down food cooked by cat chefs before flying around a pookie with an insect glaive while your friends cut off its tail and use said tail to beat the poor thing to death. My eyes are starting to hurt, so I put on my reading glasses. One recent trend that's helped the quality shift in these adaptations has been the move to TV rather than cinema. It's much easier to squeeze the narratives and themes explored in a 20+ hour game into serialized television rather than the tight time restrictions of film. This has led to some video game adaptations that follow the source material much more closely than the examples I've mentioned so far, in particular The Last of Us. You like that?
Hey.
Now, I found the general discussions around The Last of Us during the time of airing a bit frustrating. I agreed with the consensus that the show was spectacular, but felt that the discourse around its identity as an adaptation was missing the proverbial forest for the trees. A common trend I observed was people praising it for its faithfulness and respect to the original because of the show's obsessive commitment to perfectly recreating fan-favorite scenes from the game. Entire chunks of cutscene are recreated shot for shot, as if you're watching cosplayers recreate the game as closely as possible, in a way that's honestly pretty commendable. This gives us a really unique case study for the ways mediums can emphasize the intended purpose and message for the art, while often not changing too much. Bringing us to Part 2, The Last of Us was mid and the show makes the art objectively better. Did I stutter? Okay, I'm obviously being facetious and don't want to disrespect the truly incredible work that the team at Naughty Dog has done in the series. Everyone on that team has more talent than I could ever even pretend to have. I'm going to talk about the reasons the first game wasn't for me, and if that's going to be enough to stop you enjoying a game that you love, what the hell are you doing on this website? No, sorry, what are you doing on the internet? You should probably leave before everything you care about is spit roasted alive and screaming in front of you. Not that I intend to spit roast. I also want to make it clear that this isn't going to be an anti-video game thing. When choosing an artwork that I want to spend my extremely limited free time immersing myself in, video games are almost always my first choice. I think we've yet to see even a millionth of what is artistically possible within the medium. I'm about to spoil the heck out of both The Last of Us Part 1 and early bits of Part 2, so if you're just watching the show, you've been warned.
Also, spoiler warning for these things, they're pretty old. You shouldn't care.
Honestly, caring about spoilers is kind of dumb. Like, we both know you're going to enjoy it anyway. And besides, The Last of Us isn't a story that'll throw a crazy plot curveball at you. It doesn't really have any red weddings. As long as you're paying attention to the direction the character arcs are moving, you're gonna figure out what's gonna happen anyway. So what is The Last of Us? Naughty Dog's 2013 magnum opus is a third-person action game about fatherhood, generational trauma, violence, and the fear that you can't protect your loved ones, among other things. As a fungal zombie apocalypse brings the world to its knees, protagonist and sexy lumberjack competition finalist Joel Miller loses his only daughter, Sarah, to the authoritarian response of those in power, a faction named Fedra. No, the soldier isn't actually from Fedra, I'm just being really quick. 20 years later, now with a healthy dose of dark past daddy, he is tasked with walking Ellie, a bratty teenage girl with a weird amount of resemblance to Elliot Page, who is also immune to the infection.
No, I'm not sick. This is 3 weeks old. Nobody lasts more than a day.
From one coast of the United States to the other, roughly, in hopes that the doctors of a Fedra resistance faction named the Fireflies will be able to study Ellie in order to create a vaccine for the infection. On the journey, Joel and Ellie form a bond, with Ellie becoming a functional surrogate daughter figure for Joel, and a replacement for Sarah. Once they arrive, the resistance doctors confirm that there will be a vaccine, but that Ellie will have to die in order for it to be created. Joel, while obviously deeply upset, does seem to initially accept this, until a resistance member escorting him away is just kind of a dick about it and does the generic thug thing of, hey, move it.
Nice shot!
After which, Joel calmly massacres everything that breathes inside the facility besides Ellie, leaving with her. Ellie, who had about as much autonomy as Snow White because she was unconscious for this whole thing, asks what happened. Joel lies, saying there was plenty of immune people and that Ellie wasn't needed for anything. Ellie challenges this, asking Joel if he's telling the truth about what really happened. He lies again, doubling down on what he had said, clearly sowing the seeds of distrust within Ellie. Credits roll. Boo, 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 boo. On a macro level, pretty much the entire story is about Joel's relationship with fatherhood. Having Sarah's death be the first major plot point in Joel's arc is there to cast a shadow over the entire story. It contextualizes who Joel is, how he relates to others, and the evil he is willing to commit to ensure the same never happens again. This is where the theme of violence is at its most potent. Joel's wicked acts are not committed for violence's sake, but as a very real and authentic, while wrong, reaction to the repetition of past trauma. This is what I understand the intent of the game to be. The violence is meant to be horrifying. It is a cold, honest expression of both fatherly love and anger at what may as well be the universe or God. I don't think Joel was slaughtering the Fireflies to him at the end of the story. I think he was slaughtering his internalized representation of the soldier that took Sarah from him 20 years prior.
That soldier is long dead by this point in the story, but it is impossible not to figure that it's him who Joel was really lashing out at when he first begins the killing.
That's my cute little analysis of the story and its themes and message, nice and cute, wrapped up in a little bow like a cat on my FYP that will immediately switch my brain off as I watch it loop for 4 hours straight. It's a good story, isn't it? But I think some of the themes struggle to be articulated fully by the video game. I find that the generic third-person combat does nothing but dilute the story, and I think the show proves this beyond a shadow of a doubt. So The Last of Us really wanted to be taken seriously. Of course, most games are simple. You jump on enemies, die, and insert another quarter to continue. Says Craig Mazin, Last of Us showrunner. Yes, this meme is made up, Craig Mazin isn't an idiot, but I do think this fake quote resonates with people so much because this was kind of the attitude some people had towards the original game when it released. At least that's how I remember it. You better believe 15-year-old me watched PewDiePie play it because I had an Xbox, and you better believe I thought it was staggeringly profound and original. Is it profound? We'll get to that later. Is it original? Absolutely not, despite 15-year-old me's admiration for the original quality I perceived in it at the time. It's a video game, and video games just haven't told a story this deep. Ignore the last 2 to 3 decades of incredible artistic voyages in the medium, especially the one that came out a year or two prior. That's about a young girl becoming the surrogate daughter of a middle-aged man with a dark past and a zombie apocalypse that ends in violent tragedy. Oh no! Sorry, Joel. Lee won the sexy lumberjack contest. Despite this lack of originality, The Last of Us achieved a staggering popularity that, at the time, was still not particularly common for games, especially being a PlayStation exclusive in a generation that was definitely Xbox-sided, with Microsoft monopolizing the dude bro market. The result, I think, was a lot of people thinking it was the biggest landmark in video game storytelling ever because a lot of people didn't have the knowledge of the kind of art that had already been made. So even though everything it did in both story and gameplay had been done better in other games long before The Last of Us got to the party, it was still lauded as unprecedented, original, and a glance into the future of games as an art form. This isn't the Last of Us was secretly bad the whole time take that it might sound like. Originality isn't the only thing that gives a work of art value. It's presented extremely well. Like, it looks stunning, it's extremely well optimized on PlayStation. The voice actors are absolutely killing it. Most of the game's narrative, while a bit unoriginal and not as deep as it wants you to think, is presented with immense amounts of skill. And originality isn't always the be-all and end-all of art anyway, you arrogant snobs. Tropes can be subverted, or they cannot. You're valid, Last of Us. You're valid. Yeah, the narrative is unoriginal, but boy howdy is it beautifully structured, with the death of Sarah bleeding into every aspect of Joel's character arc, culminating in a scene that paints him as unquestionably evil in the face of repeating that same loss. As the objectively best games critic ever and my parasocial dad, Noah Cadwell-Gervais, says, in The Last of Us, the player isn't really a player, they're an actor.
Your role in The Last of Us is not so much survivor as it is actor.
The fun comes from performing the dramatic role of Joel, not from any agency video games provide as a medium. This places The Last of Us in a very unique position when trying to understand its identity. It has a lot of the signifiers of video games, but falls short of the common expectations of them in a few very specific ways. The player being in the role of an actor following the script, rather than exerting autonomy over the experience, stands in direct contrast with the game needing to have gameplay. And not just any gameplay, this is early 2010s AAA! We have to do everything in our power to copy Resident Evil 4 without understanding the nuances that made it fun. This is PlayStation's Naughty Dog. They can't make a game that's not just mechanically retextured Gears of War with middling stealth mechanics. Yeah, okay, I'm being reductive, but you get the point, right? AAA be AAA, and due to a blood pact made by Neil Druckmann, Phil Spencer, and a surprisingly intelligent goat, AAA means generic combat. And generic combat means we gotta address the whole Ludo narrative thing. Yes, I know, but we both knew this was gonna come up. For the uninitiated, Ludo narrative dissonance is where... What, you thought I was going to explain it? I'm not Game Maker's Toolkit, go Google it! What gameplay do you think would best fit a story about a grumpy dad with chronic dead plot device syndrome learning to care for a new surrogate daughter figure? A story about familial bonds, fatherhood, and the inability to escape the scars of one's past and bringing those scars into new relationships. A violence that explores the complexities of that when contrasted against the violence of the world around them and the violence within them. Surprisingly, violent gameplay actually does make some kind of sense. But this? In The Last of Us, you don't just punch dudes' lights out, you cave their heads in. You mash their skulls into paste against the corners of desks, and boy, do you push that one guy's chin into that shard of glass. In the game, Joel is a psycho murderer beyond the point of no return long before the actual narrative wanted me to feel that way. It feels like a slapstick comedy skit making fun of how apocalypse stories always assume the worst in people. Now, this isn't to say I think The Last of Us has a ludonarrative dissonance problem. It's a bit more complicated than that. I want to separate this argument from other ludonarrative discussions I've seen recently, like one that I saw on TikTok saying Jedi Fallen Order has ludonarrative dissonance because you're a Jedi that does murder on the space fascists, and everyone's already dunked on that take for being a bad take, but I think both sides are missing a bit of nuance. Like, on one hand, no, Cal killing the North American Empire stand-ins doesn't break the story because they're evil fascists and killing them is completely morally justified. Public service announcement. If people are doing these, they should be removed from society. Ideally through de-radicalization, but if that doesn't work and they take power, you gotta do what you gotta do. Why do I even have to say that? Why is that required to, like, articulate? ScarJo and Jojo Rabbit is exceptionally based and would have been even more based if she unalived some of those Nazi bastards. I wish Jojo Rabbit was more like BJ Blazkowicz. Nazi scum. But also, the people arguing that you're an idiot for thinking violence could impact your experience of the story are also missing an important point. Imagine being empathetic, loser. Uncharted wasn't ruined by the violence contradicting the story. Funny you should mention Uncharted. Naughty Dog's other third-person shooter franchise also features huge amount of violence in gameplay, but I think it makes efforts to point out the silliness of it and encourages the player just to not think about it that much. It's just an action game about treasure hunting that also happens to involve large amounts of murder. For some people, they can look past it. For others, they couldn't. For the latter, the dissonance was just too much, and as a result, they found the primary cast really unlikable. Some people just weren't happy with the violence being left largely unacknowledged by the text. Sorry, did I say some people? Sorry, I meant Naughty Dog! In an interview, Bruce Stanley, director of The Last of Us, told GameIndustry.biz about Uncharted. Its main antagonist gets to throw his minions at you so that you can overcome the obstacles to get to the treasure. That being said, whether it be a puzzle game or a shooter, you have to have interesting core mechanics to keep the player invested. That's our problem as designers. In 2007, that's where the industry was. That's where we were. We didn't necessarily have the wherewithal, the clarity, so to speak, that we do now. The Last of Us, from very early on, wanted to address the whole violence thing. It's choosing to make violence part of the plot so that the gameplay can make more contextual sense. That's the thing about ludonarrative dissonance in The Last of Us. I don't think The Last of Us has it, or at least not totally. The relationship between the gameplay and narrative is much tighter, which creates a much more unique problem. What happens when the gameplay writes you into a corner? When your story could go in a more impactful direction, but the gameplay would make that direction so absurd that anyone currently immersed would suffer such severe whiplash the head would follow in Charlie Graham's footsteps. Throughout the story, Joel has refused to give Ellie a gun, while she has argued that she wants to help and that protection would be easier if more than one of them were armed. In the climactic scene of this plotline, Joel's fighting a bunch of thugs and gets caught out by the last one and is being suffocated. In the game, Ellie grabs Joel's gun, which he had dropped during the altercation, and kills the generic thug just instantly. The show does things a little differently. Ellie had found the gun ages ago and taken it explicitly without Joel's knowledge. Also, Ellie doesn't kill with the shot. No, it's okay. We're not fighting anymore.
Get back behind the wall.
No, I'm sorry. Please, no, please. So immediately you'll have noticed some of the small changes, but let's talk about a vital change in the structure between the two versions of this story that significantly changed the outcome of this scene. That being that in the show, this is only the second time we've seen Joel commit any acts of violence against humans. The only other one before this point was a Fedra soldier that had caught them in their journey. This is important because as a result, not only is the violence more impactful because the audience has yet to see Joel do much of it, but the way Joel can respond to Ellie doing a murder to save his life is completely different from the game, and I genuinely think it's light years better. So in the game, Joel gets mad at Ellie because she used a gun when he didn't want her to.
Well, you're glad I didn't, right?
I'm glad I didn't get my head blown off by a goddamn kid.
Do I have to explain why this sucks and is poopy doo-doo? It's such a forced melodrama. It makes absolutely no sense and is just there to have character conflict with mediocre functional justification. Why is Joel angry? How does it serve the story or the character arcs? Like, sure, the reconciliation of this acts as a moment that helps the audience understand that the two characters are growing closer, but the show managed to do even better without this crap. It suggests that all this conflict can be done better without making Joel have to grow past the critical character flaw of being a complete dumbass. It's bad writing that's bad in every other story that uses this grumpy old dude mad that child exists trope. And it's even worse here because, like, The Last of Us has points to make about love and humanity, and they're good points. But this kind of weird forced conflict dilutes them, thus, in my opinion, making the art less poignant. Do you know what an idiot plot is? Stories where all the problems are based on someone being an idiot. That's this plot point! Joel here is just being so completely and utterly drop-dead stupid. Girl shoot gun, girl shouldn't have gun, make Joel mad. Girl save life, maybe thank her, no, Joel mad. The show's version of this conflict is totally different. Joel isn't mad at Ellie at all. He's miserable. He's horrified that Ellie had to kill someone.
You're glad I did, right?
You're just a kid. You should know what it means to... It's not like you killed him, but shooting or... I know what it's like. First time that you hurt someone like that.
He doesn't say anything about how she shouldn't have a gun, which is arguably more justified here because she actively hid that from him. But in the show, Joel apologizes. He says sorry that the last dude got the jump on her, forcing her to end another sentient existence. He asks her if it was her first time killing someone. And when she says no, you can see the anguish in him that this child has had to do such unspeakable things just to keep existing.
It wasn't my first time.
And then he just gives her a gun. Right there, no pointless arguments. Joel choosing to give Ellie a gun wasn't about ceasing to be such an idiot that he didn't see her as a companion that could help, but because he learned that the innocence he was trying to protect by not letting her have a gun was never there in the first place. This totally reframes the way Joel treats Ellie early in the story, and is far more impactful as a dramatic plot point, and better sets up the twisted path that Ellie will someday walk, and better ties into Sarah's death. Joel's not an idiot brick like this plot thread in the games would have you believe. He really does care about others, despite the harshness of the world burying that caring nature under callous survivalism. His refusal to let Ellie help in the fighting actually makes sense. He didn't want the literal child he was protecting as the wish made by his partner's dying breath to have to end another sentient person's existence, an act that would certainly irreversibly change and scar a person. Not that I would know, officer. This small change is a huge elevation of the characters and plot that would have never worked in the games. Like, can you imagine if the games had this exchange?
So it gets easier when you get older?
No.
What do you mean, Joel? We slaughtered the entire population of Yas, New South Wales before we even got Bill's Utes! The problem is, if the game tried to take the whole killing his heart and ruptures the soul route the show takes, which is far more interesting in my opinion, there would be ludonarrative dissonance. What the show does with its ability to pick and choose the moments of human violence more carefully is make the story purposes of said violence significantly more impactful. The game just can't do that as well when the player is already pretty desensitized to it. In the show, when you hear Joel finish off the kid that Ellie shot, it's guttural, it's unnerving, it's personal. And in the game, the thug is a non-entity whose death is as meaningful as the squashing of an ant. Unfortunately, this pushes the plot into making video game Joel an idiot for tension's sake. I didn't like him, and I felt nothing but vindication when I watched him get beaten to death by a golf club, despite the fact that the game really wanted me to love him. I can't wait for the same scene in the show to rip my soul out and leave me wistfully watching Pedro Pascal edits on TikTok.
I'm your daddy.
It's Oberyn Martell all over again, isn't it? Pedro's characters keep sticking up for the little guys, then dying in exceptionally violent ways for it. Anyway, this is what I mean when I say playing the role of Joel conflicts with the gameplay. It's what I mean when I say the show objectively elevates the art. I'm not just throwing around the objectivity claim for no reason. I honestly, genuinely do think this change tangibly impacts the mechanics of the art in a very positive way. Not needing to dance around ludonarrative dissonance makes the character arcs so much more human and artistically functional. These plot points are so much more smooth without the cartoonishly violent gameplay being stapled to the narrative side like a grotesque tumor. I'm sorry, that was mean, I promise it's just a joke. And this is where we come back to the topic of adaptations. I started the video by saying I don't like the way people talk about The Last of Us as being an adaptation that respects the original, because HBO barely had to adapt anything. How do you adapt Resident Evil into a show? How do you adapt Halo? Cuphead. With great difficulty, that's how. The Last of Us in its original form was always essentially just a HBO drama series that was made into a game for some reason. My own aforementioned critical analysis Joel Daddy Noah Cadwell-Gervais agrees.
But it fails to leverage much of anything that makes games special as a medium to instead add interactivity into what's at its heart an HBO limited series.
They didn't have to try that hard. They could have just copied the game script, cut out the gameplay bits, and still had a pretty functional, if slightly less compelling TV show. Now, that's not to say that they didn't try. In fact, they did. Really hard. And the result is that literally every single change is based on a deep understanding of these characters and their arcs and is elevating it infinitely beyond the game's reach. They went above and beyond all possible expectations, adding a ton of stuff that couldn't have worked in a game, and all of the new stuff is just so much better than the game's counterpart. Bill and Frank's story? Genius! Crushed my soul and I wanted to step on me. Inverts Bill's function as a warning of what Joel could become and transforms him into a promise of love in the face of literal apocalyptic adversity. Making Sam deaf? Gold star for representing a disability often neglected in media and would have been really difficult to efficiently portray in a video game. Kathleen and her uprising? Genius replacement for generic thugs that no one cares about that elevates the stakes of Henry and Sam's story. Henry and Sam's death? Made way more horrifyingly effective by the subtleties of the acting. Bella Ramsey's agonized squeal when Henry shoots himself in Minecraft is my sleep paralysis demon. Henry, no! And that's just the first half of the story. All of this for me raises a question. Is HBO respecting The Last of Us? Or was it disrespectful to make The Last of Us a video game to begin with? Part 3, Quantum Mechanics. My favorite kind of video essays are the ones that steadily increase the threats to disappear up their own ass. I'm only a few paragraphs away from wearing my own small intestines as a hat. Do I sound insane when I flip the respectful adaptation relationship like that? Do I? Do I? Let me explain. Nicholas Luhmann is a German sociologist who talked a lot about how society is built on communication. In his paper, The Medium of Art, he argues that art is a medium of communication. To which everyone said, yada, and moved on with their lives because philosophy is a waste of time to everyone that wasn't dropped on their head as a child. Problem is, my parents used me as a basketball. To be clear, that's a joke. My parents love me very much, and I was never dropped, as far as I know. Although it would explain a lot. So far in this video, I've used the word medium like everyone else on the internet does. Film, TV, games, music, these things are all categorized as mediums. Anime is a medium. Luhmann, or translator David Roberts, uses the word medium in its more scientific definition, that being the physical material through which an object is passed. Wiggly air is the medium of music because for music to reach our ears, the noise of the instrument speakers or headphones vibrate the air, which our ears then hear. Copper wire is the medium of electricity. A bunch of electricity and technology I don't understand is the medium through which I'm talking to you right now. This is what Luhmann means by the medium of art. Art is a medium on which communication travels. From here on, when I say medium, this is what I'm referring to. But can you tell that I tried to shave this morning, but I trimmed the right hand side of my beard, and then the razor died, so just half of my beard is slightly shorter than the other half. Do you like it when I'm close to you? The closest thing to what we've been calling mediums is what Luhmann calls forms. Kind of. We'll get to that. Both of these words have a bit of plasticity in the paper, so for now, medium is the technology, form is the TV show. I promise this will get back to The Last of Us. Please don't leave. The purpose of Luhmann's essay is to examine the relationship between medium and form. First, we should establish that Luhmann defines these concepts as loosely or strictly coupled, medium being loose and form being strict. Mediums being loosely coupled means that their existence is vague and separate from our perception of reality.
Air is only a medium because it is loosely coupled. It can transmit noises because it does not itself condense to noises. We only hear the clock ticking because the air does not tick.
Form, on the other hand, is what arises when the vague, non-perceived medium is condensed into an object that not only demands human attention, but requires it to exist in the first place. We don't think about the air wiggling, but we perceive that wiggle through the forms we ascribe it, such as music. The important part to us is not the air wiggling, however, without human intervention, the reason for caring about the wiggly air in the first place doesn't exist. Music is because we make it and call it music. And for no other reason.
Attribution is directed by the coordination of the elements, whereas the medium itself is too diffuse to arouse attention. It holds its elements ready for coordination through form.
From here, it can be logically assumed that the medium is the conceptual object within the relationship that holds power over form. It's the unchangeable element at the core of everything. Medium is the alpha Chad being innate in the universe as old as time, whilst form is the beta incel cuck only existing because we made it. Music can't exist without first having wiggly air to exist on, right? Right? Luhmann isn't so sure. He seeks to challenge this assumption to find a more interesting and complete understanding of the medium-form relationship, and to do so considers whether it could be form that constitutes the medium. Okay, this is going to be hard to explain, especially considering the essay was written in German and translated with extremely poor English grammar. Like, the points that are being made are great and make sense once you decipher what in the ever-living heck the words themselves are supposed to articulate. Like, how about this passage? The question is thus, how can society behind society actually be projected so that society's choice of form can become grimacingly visible? What? Wait, let me read it. The question is thus, how can society behind society actually be projected so that society's choice of form can become grimacingly visible? What? Okay, so what arguments can be made to suggest that medium is actually the secret beta and form was the chat all along? Firstly, let's examine the rigid and loosely coupled distinction that we made earlier. Medium was loose and form was rigid. Does the more rigid agent not overpower the flexible? Therefore, does the form not assert itself over medium?
In the relation of medium and form, the more rigid form asserts itself because it is less flexible.
Secondly, Luhmann argues that specifically during the process of creating art, new mediums can be created by the form. Take jazz standards. The tunes have become a staple for all learned jazz players and are regularly reimagined in new ways. These songs have superseded form to become the vehicles of expression for millions of people. The form, through cultural repetition and recreation, has itself become a medium. The original form has emerged as a vehicle on which others can have further discussion.
Form creates its own artistic medium by using it for its expressive purposes.
Now, we've arrived at two pretty strong assertions about the relationship between medium and form. Two opposites existing at the same time. That's not possible! And yet, here we are. The medium is almost always undefined. It doesn't even exist in our perception. This makes it vague and often not considered, and thus, for all intents and purposes, may as well not exist. However, simultaneously, the form is completely subservient to the medium because the medium has to exist at all for the form to be applied to it. And form doesn't exist unless it is observed because that's the art moment. The moment of experience and memory of it is where the meaning of art lies. If a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it fall, does it have medium? Does it have form? No! In art, the medium requires form to have a purposeful existence, and the form requires human intervention to exist. Humanity is an art prerequisite, the gods reigning over their own creation. Art is an object of quantum physics only existing when observed.
If a tree falls and no one's around to paint it, is it art?
It's like those damn puzzles in the Outer Wilds with the quantum material that breaks my brain.
Strange rock moving around in this grotto appears to react to conscious observation, but Gabbro claims the rock exists in all possible states until it is observed.
Luhmann's paper was easier to decipher than these perplexing puzzles of pretentious, paltering Bullshit! I'm sorry, CJ, I only use the P word as a joke. It's not actually pretentious. Please don't hit me.
I do regret to inform you that you're an incompetent authority and may not know enough about what you're talking about to be evaluating quality in the first place.
The result of all of this is that medium and form have this weird circular relationship where medium is vague and undefined and thus subservient, while form is rigid and assertive over it. But at the same time, form is completely dependent on the medium to exist at all, thus making it subservient to medium.
There is never a medium without form, nor a form without medium.
I promise this will link back to The Last of Us. How can we make better sense of this dissonance? How does the tension created by the equal existence of two opposites resolve?
The greater rigidity asserts itself over the greater flexibility, with the risk that this assertion fails, is criticized, can be done better, or is finally relegated to history and the museum as the peculiarity of a certain style.
He's talking about me! It's critical analysis! It's what I'm doing right now! Medium and form have a contested relationship until an artist dictates otherwise, at which point it's up to the audience, those observing and comprehending, to come to some kind of understanding about whether or not medium or form should have been emphasized, and whether that decision enabled the effective communication of ideas and feelings from the artist, and the validation of the function of this choice is what becomes common practice. Now, like every white dude who thinks they're funny enough to know rules about comedy, I want to say yes and. The contested push-pull relationship between medium and form that is decided by the artist and interpreted by the audience, that's art! Like all of it! It's everything! Every aspect of the creative experience, from inception to production to reception to cultural impact and staying power, all of it comes down to the decisions of what concepts and ideas in your art, represented by our medium-form dichotomy, holds power and which need to be subservient. Until the artist makes the decision, neither can fully exist. Not just that, but I think every single individual moment of art creation involves one or two competing objects, what we have thus far called medium and form, and choosing which one takes priority in order to allow the art to be an effective medium of communication for the desired themes. This happens at every single level of the artistic process, from the macro level of fundamental structure of your book, TV show, or album, to the minutiae of choosing exactly which note should go where and which synonym should be used in that sentence. Remember when I said what medium form actually defined is quite malleable? Hell, we've already established that forms themselves can become medium, but what are the actual implications of that? Air is the vague medium that is defined by the form of music, but music is kind of broad, isn't it? Like, a lot of categories fall under its umbrella. Sounds like music is also kind of vague and undefined, like a medium that requires form to bind it. Now, music isn't the form, music is the medium. It's jazz, rock, or hip-hop, or pop. Those are the forms. But I pick jazz, but jazz seems kind of vague and undefined too. Is it bebop? Is it fusion? Is it Mario Kart music? Jazz has become the medium for these forms. But fusion is also pretty varied. Sure, it's all jazz, but what instruments are you using? What time signatures? What tempos? Like, what? Every layer of detail in the art is the form to a medium, and the medium to a different form. And it's about now you might be realizing that all this philosophy is to argue what might be the most obvious artistic statement of all time. Everything is connected! Every single aspect of the art object is built on the decisions made between equally competing choices, and understanding the ways that these relationships affect each other and accounting for it is what creates cohesion. Certain choices will make communication effective, others won't. This is how we get common practice and artistic theory. The decision about what parts of the art should take priority are measured against the lexicon of decisions that have already been made in order to ascertain what options you have that others have used in the past. Common practice! And as soon as common practice becomes canonized by articulation and consensus, doing the opposite also becomes a medium. John Cage is an American composer who once existed somewhere in the world and now exists in the spiteful memories of the conservatives that hated him. He was known for making a lot of really weird art with like prepared piano and stuff, which is when you put nails and other junk in the piano to make certain strings sound different. Weird out-of-the-box stuff like that. His most famous work is probably 433, a piece of music that has no music in it. Kind of. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence with the performer on stage looking like they're about to play their instrument. The music is the ambient noise of the concert hall, the expectant and confused silence of the audience shuffling quietly in their seats, trying to remain proper and decent like the good little bourgeoisie they are, but also slowly growing in agitation as the performance they paid to see never seems to begin. I'm really spitting a lot. Do you like that? Do you like it when I spit on you? It's supposed to challenge the sanctity of the concert music experience and make fun of the artificial exclusivity in what is hegemonically considered high-class music. John Cage was an anarchist comrade, and his pieces of music were often metaphorical Molotovs. Exceptionally base! But also this piece has had a lot of criticism for being obtuse and stupid from a lot of people, including admittedly myself at times. Cause it's weird, right? Like, homie made a song that isn't a song about the cultural classism of songs? Sounds like a liberal to me. If the artistic process is one of giving power to medium or form, John Cage is an example of an artist that actively resolved the various artistic medium form tensions in ways that eschewed convention in exchange for the ability to communicate much more complicated ideas in a short span of time. In fact, this rejection of convention, the refusal to prioritize medium and form in the same way as others, creates and becomes in and of itself a medium on which communication occurs. His non-conformity was the medium on which he made an artwork about the mindless conformity of performative high culture. Galaxy brain! This is how you get the kind of work that Jacob Geller talks about in his video Who's Afraid of Modern Art. The weird stuff that uses the severing of tradition to make something really weird that does a great job of exploring really hyper-specific and complicated ideas that are really hard to conventionally articulate. Seriously, go watch Jacob's video. It's a fantastic rundown on the conservative politics of experimental art. He does a great job of exploring why the conservative stance on art is rotten at its core, as well as expressing the value of this art in a way that really changed my stance on a lot of it when I first watched it. In fact, this video definitely started me on the path towards a more empathetic understanding of John Cage's 433, making me less likely to call it dumb and stupid. As an artistic technique, the rejection of common practice allows an artist to communicate far more complicated ideas and feelings via the medium that is created by eschewing convention.
Only through it do we actually see how weak and arbitrary normal speech and writing are by comparison. Here too, we have a relation of looser and stricter coupling which can be used at the same time to open up spaces of possibility in language which language does not itself offer.
Again, Geller's video describes this really well.
It makes me feel like
this kind of art very much exists in the space of vibes. You know, hard to articulate, but boy, can it make you feel some weird feelings. So finally, after all that, where does this leave us with The Last of Us? What's the point of all this? One of the biggest medium form tensions that I think game designers must resolve is the tension between gameplay and story. Most of the time, gameplay is chosen, even in games with really strong narratives. In fact, this ties back into the video game adaptation discussion. The Sonic movie made stuff up because in the original games, story was always subservient to gameplay. Sonic always had a threadbare plot justification because they're fun kids games about going really, really fast. Story isn't exactly high on the priority list. Toby Fox programmed a unique battle system first and then proceeded to build an entire narrative around it, and it shows. One of the things that makes the narrative so strong is the way it interweaves with the gameplay, which is only possible because the gameplay was the foundation and the story was woven around it. Or how about the AAA scene? I doubt Assassin's Creed was pitched to be the story about world's most human Desmond Miles pretending to be people infinitely more interesting than him. It would have been pitched as a historical fiction assassin simulator. At least I assume. It'd be funny if one of the original creators was just like, nah, it's all about the story, and just completely derailed my point. There are also plenty of non-conventional games that prioritize story and sacrifice conventional gameplay as a result. We've already talked about The Walking Dead, a game that certainly helped popularize a certain style of narrative-focused game that has since been continued by the likes of Life is Strange, thus creating common practice out of the medium that had been created by dismissing the common practice that had already been there. There are also loads of examples of games that simply have kind of crap gameplay that works because story is the focus. Silent Hill 2 deprioritized gameplay with the incredible game design technique of having the gameplay suck incalculable amounts of ass. Yet many people, including myself, argue in favor of Silent Hill 2's terrible controls. The artist made the decision that in our medium form relationship of gameplay and story would assert itself over gameplay, and as a result, have terrible combat and controls. The gameplay just didn't matter that much. The focus was justifiably elsewhere. And on top of that, the awful gameplay did a great job of putting you in the shoes of James Sunderland, a neurotic office clerk who's being psychologically bullied by the constructs of his id. This produced a more cohesive work that more effectively communicated its purpose. Heck, I'm an office clerk, and every time I go to the gym, I feel as in control of my own body as I feel in control of James when he's about to get his face sucked off by a monster representing his rotting dead wife's reproductive organs. Now I want to make something clear. The choice of what aspects of the art assert itself over the other doesn't make one more important experientially. It's more of a guiding force for the other decisions made during the creative process. I think that Spec Ops: The Line is actually a fantastic example of this. The 2012 game was explicitly a critique and condemnation of modern war games like Call of Duty and Battlefield. The gameplay was, by design, an extremely generic cover shooter in order to give an initial false impression of kinship with the work it was critiquing, before having the protagonist commit more and more heinous crimes in the name of being a war hero until literally everyone he was going into the game trying to save is dead. The gameplay asserts itself over story. The story was made to suit the gameplay. But no one remembers the gameplay because it was boring and generic by design in order to act as the vehicle for critique. The story is what everyone remembers about the game, despite it being subservient. So what about The Last of Us? We have the medium form relationship at the ready on which you can apply any two concepts within an art form that are in constant struggle, and it's up to the artist to decide who wins. Who do they bet on? Whomst going home with a broken nose while the crowd cheers about the beautiful quality of its assaulter? Which hangs its head in dejected shame after they failed to win the hot dog eating contest and finally prove I was right, Dad? Is there a wrong decision that can be made about our medium form duality? Can the artist do something wrong? Yes. So sometimes the mediums should be given power to better fit the artistic vision, and sometimes form should be emphasized so that the work follows convention in order to better articulate the point that is being made. It seems that the two decisions available both operate with specific pros and cons in different circumstances, so no value judgment can be made in a vacuum. Wrong! There is one! It's on the artist, arbiter of the creation's existence, the god of their world, breathing creation into being, doesn't really choose at all. Part 4, but I kind of want to eat the cake. Having a cake and eating it too is a saying that I always thought was kind of dumb. Like, surely if someone has gone through the process of exchanging currency for a sweet and tasty pastry made to look like Charmander with the birthday candle on the tail, implying the child will execute the creature before consumption because canonically if that fire goes out the Charmander dies, they should get to eat it, right? In this, I had fundamentally misunderstood what the specific words in the saying were supposed to mean. To say that you can't have your cake and eat it too is to say that by its consumption, your ownership of it is negated because it no longer exists. You cannot eat a cake and still have the cake unless you rip open your stomach with a scythe and slurp up the acid in which the cake dissolved, creating a Mobius strip of flesh and internal fluid. Jeez, did I really write that? Why? Herein lies my problem with The Last of Us as a video game. I think it tries too hard to not choose whether story or gameplay should hold power over the other. The tension in that medium form relationship is never fully resolved by the third party, and thus the content of the two undermines that of the other, and I speculate that this is at least partially the result of corporate interests. There is nothing in this world that really wants to have the cake and eat it too more than capitalism. Remember at the start of the video when I said I wasn't going to talk about capitalism? I lied, but you fell for it. What, did you think these were prescription? I wore them to trick you into thinking I'm smarter than I actually am, and you fell for that too! From the outset, The Last of Us was always considered to be story first by its creators, especially Neil Druckmann from what I've read. In every description of the early ideas that eventually became The Last of Us, one thing has remained the same. It was always going to be about a grisly middle-aged man escorting a young girl through a zombie apocalypse. The story was first.
As the story evolved and took different shapes and different forms, the thing that was always there was Joel and Ellie.
Early gameplay ideas seem to have been built around this story, and as a result of not following the convention that story served gameplay, they all sound kind of novel and interesting. For example, Joel was potentially going to have a heart condition that instigated regular swaps into controlling Ellie, an idea that probably became the Winter chapter. Clearly, the story was supposed to assert itself over gameplay. This is a problem the developers seem to be keenly aware of.
At Naughty Dog, that's what we're trying to do, is pair story and gameplay together.
Trying to marry gameplay to story in video games is an ambition I wholeheartedly support. However, we need to make sure we don't get this confused. Making sure gameplay and story are harmonious still requires one of them to hold ultimate power. When I think about games that are praised for their ludonarrative harmony, there's always a clear choice between whether gameplay serves story or vice versa. In Undertale, story serves gameplay. In Dark Souls, story serves gameplay. In Soma, gameplay serves story. In The Last of Us, there is a clear desire for the gameplay to serve the story, and a seeming understanding that this was the goal of the developers. So why do I think the choice wasn't made so clearly in the final product? A lot of the early gameplay ideas in being subservient to story were fairly non-conventional. Why did that change? The gameplay in The Last of Us was extremely conventional for the time, and like still is, honestly. The third-person shooter was a kind of gameplay default at the time. And wait, we've touched on this point already. Naughty Dog is one of PlayStation's studios, and PlayStation exclusives have a very specific look and feel to them. I mean, like, sure, The Last of Us was one of the games that helped set that standard, but it had certainly already existed prior. The AAA games industry, to this day, still very much exists in the shadow of Gears of War, a game from 2006. Remember? The Blood Pact. You remember the Blood Pact? The Blood Pact. The Blood Pact between Neil Druckmann, Phil Spencer, and the GOAT. The GOAT was an ambassador for grimy chest-high walls, and it's not a greatest of all time GOAT, it's just a regular boring old GOAT. Who smelled. Now, like in 2023, we might have started to move on from it now that Dark Souls and Breath of the Wild have shattered critical and commercial records, but in 2013, we absolutely had it. Like, I can't find anything suggesting there was ever conflict between the capitalists and the artists involved in the project, but from the sounds of it, Druckmann was respectful to other people's ideas and happy to change his plans to an extent in order to be accommodating. I imagine that if there was pressure to alter the gameplay plans in order to better fit with the standard of the time, Druckmann wouldn't have been overly fussed about changing it as long as his story was still told, and to be fair, it very much was. I don't want to be mean or to come across as mean, and hope it's been obvious that any roasting I've done has been mainly to articulate my analytical points with comedic effect. This is obviously a story I care about, considering I've spent 11,000 words talking about it. I hope despite all the jokes it's clear that I think this game is mostly a tremendous piece of craft that, though stumbled in lots of places, is worthy of its current place in our cultural zeitgeist. I swear I'm not just flexing my vocabulary, that word's just really fun to say. Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist. Here, you try it. It's not as fun when you try it. Although I've been fairly critical of The Last of Us in this video, I want it to be understood from the perspective of the show. The game is very good. The show is just better. The show is better at communicating the intended purpose of the story within the conventions of that form. Like, you know, I wonder if we even ever culturally, really, truly saw The Last of Us as a video game. Like, who here had their first experience of it with a controller in their hand? I didn't. My wife didn't. Most of my friends didn't. We watched PewDiePie play it. We watched Markiplier play it. We watched Jacksepticeye play it. I think for a significant amount of people, The Last of Us has always been a passive experience, one to be watched rather than played. Even when it was a video game, it never really exclusively existed as a video game to us. I never played the video game because I didn't have a PlayStation, and when I finally did get the opportunity to truly play it for myself, I found I wasn't as enthralled as I had been simply watching it. The gameplay literally added nothing for me, and in fact, by its presence, prevented me from reaching the next plot beat that I was interested in. In fact, it was me playing it for the first time with a controller in my hands that made me go from my, 15-year-old self-opinion of it being profound to viewing it in a more critical and carefully analytical light. I've seen some people online talk about how they're sick of the ludonarrative dissonance discussion, and honestly I kind of am too, but we're never going to be rid of it until people that champion games as an art form start to fully comprehend the gameplay as a method of artistic expression rather than simply being the thing that you do because it's a video game, and as a result, no longer trying to just copy films. Gameplay is as much an art form as writing, dialogue, sound design, music, concept art, 3D modeling, and I think a lot of the people, even those who love games and say they're art, have yet to fully accept this in the truth and authentically appreciate the art moment through the modes of interaction. Now, this isn't to say that all games have to perfectly weave together narrative and gameplay, or that cinematic direction in gaming is automatically bad, but rather that the gameplay systems need to be chosen only after careful consideration of its interdependency with the story. When it comes to prioritizing, just choose the one that best reflects the themes of your story. If you're lost on what to choose, chances are the thing that you think of first, the first seed of this idea, is probably what needs to be assertive. Whatever is a higher priority, whether it be story or gameplay, an understanding of the relationship between the two is non-negotiable. Choose your art form with intent. And if an idea for a story would better fit a show than a game, then just make a damn TV show. And if the story would better fit the gameplay being subservient, Have it be non-conventional. It makes for more cohesive art. This is why I think the show was so able to thoroughly elevate the text. The medium form tension is pretty heartily resolved when you hack one off with a machete. As much as the game seems to want, it can't have its cake and eat it too. And the show, by the nature of its existence, has forced the cake to be eaten. The Last of Us is very representative of a transitional period in the games industry. One where technology finally reached the point that a game could mimic realistic visual fidelity with storytelling methods resembling traditional cinema for the full runtime of a video game. It was a necessary experiment that was always going to be done, and I'm glad it was done with a story that could be later adapted into something more effective. However, I'm sad that I knew how the story shakes out by the time the show came around. I genuinely think the ending was far more impactful in the show specifically because TV Joel has less blood on his hands. It was the first time we saw him kill on a truly large scale, and I think that scene would have been even more effective not knowing it was coming. In the game, the massacre is largely the same as every other human combat section experientially, and I think the show's version is just more cohesive. And I'm very excited to see what this means for The Last of Us Part 2. I'm one of the few who found the narrative in that game far more compelling than the first, but at the same time, it has a clear priority in the story gameplay tension. While it's hard to pinpoint whether story or gameplay asserts, I think it's gameplay. The monotony of the violence is much more of a focal point in the story, and the gameplay being monotonous distinctly adds to it. I'm excited to see how the show tackles such a different experience without losing clarity. Ultimately, these stories are special, and I'm glad people are giving them their due time. I want to eat the cake. I'm okay if that means I can't have it. Yes, this entire video is actually about how I want to kill and eat Charmander.
Wow, what an amazing video. I am sure you want more. There isn't any, because I have a full-time job and like earn bands and things like that. If you want more and want it to come faster, I made a Patreon. So give me money, and then I can do less work for money and do art and critique for money. Not even art and critique. Do art and analysis for money instead. Yes. Give me money. Also, I put a song out in January. Go listen to it. Also, listen to my band Catstronaut. Okay, bye.